te he buscado por los anillos de Saturno, a ver si encuentro un beso tuyo donde lo guardé. Y ahora paso todo el día pensándote y no te he encontrado ni por la luna de Neptuno.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Happy Empowerment Hour. I have to tell you, I am so excited to have with us today a very dear friend. I want to say a best friend now here in San Antonio. I am so excited she moved here. Dr. Shauna Shapiro is a professor. She's internationally known as a mindfulness expert. She teaches at Stanford. She teaches at UT Austin. Her TED Talk has over 2.5 million downloads because her subject matter is of essence of things that we need. And I have to tell you, she is not only embodies it within her book, but she embodies it within her persona. And I am honored to have my dear friend with me today, Dr. Shauna Shapiro. Hello, beautiful friend.
Oh, thanks, Iklali. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, you know, Shauna, I will tell you this, your book truly transformed me at the right time. We keep on talking about divine timing. It literally was divine timing in when we met. But your story approached me at my personal time of when I, was at the middle of my divorce, if you want to, from that perspective. But I have to tell you that you taught me compassion for myself. And it's interesting because I think we're always taught to give that to everybody else. So I would love for you to tell the audience a little bit about your story and why this became such an important subject matter. Because I know they're all going to read the book, but I think that that's something that's really important for you to introduce us to what led you to this path.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. So for me, it started when I was quite young. I was 17 and I had spinal fusion surgery. So I had a metal rod put in my spine and went from this healthy, active teenager to lying in a hospital bed, unable to walk. And the physical pain was challenging, but what was worse was the emotional pain. My fear, what was going to happen in the future, would I walk again? And I didn't have the resources to cope. I was a teenager. And that's when I found mindfulness. And it opened up this possibility that I could be happy again, that life wasn't over, that it wasn't always going to be this way. And so eventually, once I recovered my health, I went to Thailand and Nepal to study mindfulness and to go to monasteries there and actually do meditation retreats. And while on retreat was when I really experienced the power of mindfulness, that for the first time since my surgery, this was 3 years later, I felt a peace and a contentment and actually free from pain for the first time. And so after those months at the monastery, I decided to come back to the United States and get my PhD and become a scientist and professor because I wanted to study like what happened and how can this help other people.
Well, and I have to tell you, first of all, thank you for caring enough about the subject matter, not only for yourself, but for the world, because you are truly transforming lives. You've helped transform my life. And as your friend, I've witnessed your meditations, and they are beautiful in how you get us back to our center. But what I love about what you do is that you remind us that the power is from within. And I think that is something that is so key and important because especially in today's, with everything going on right now, that the world has been in chaos, if you will, for over a year. How have you coped? Have you had to cope with what all of us have had to go to? Because you're an expert here. So do you go through the same ups and downs that we do currently? Or is it something that you're like, okay, I already know this, so I just go on?
I wish. No, absolutely. I think one of the things that mindfulness teaches us is that we're all human and we all experience pain and loneliness and loss and confusion, that nothing can protect us from the vicissitudes of life. What mindfulness does give you, though, is a different way of relating to it. So that when I'm in pain or when I've made a mistake or when I'm afraid about the world, instead of being like, oh, what's wrong with you? And you're so weak, or instead of criticizing and judging myself, I actually bring compassion to myself. I say, oh, sweetheart, this is scary, or you're overwhelmed. And what's interesting is the science shows when we treat ourselves with compassion, what it does is it kind of puts the brakes on our physiology So instead of going to fight or flight stress response, we start to calm down. We have more resources available to us, and we release oxytocin, which immediately starts to soothe us. And in this way, bringing compassion to ourselves not only feels good, it actually makes you more effective at dealing with whatever challenge you're facing.
And I want to speak to that in a little bit, and a little bit later. I hope that you take us through a little bit of a lesson that everybody can walk away with today in this. But what I remember, and it's interesting because here, I think that at times I'm going to call it my personal Mexican Catholic guilt that was part of me with my divorce. And here I've read your book, and I remember sobbing halfway through it, going, "Oh my gosh, I'm not the only one," because it's so pivotal in what you went through, and I'm so grateful for how it opened my eyes to it. But what's interesting, I want to highlight a conversation you and I had, which was, remember, we're going to go for a walk, and we're talking about my divorce at that time. And I was like, "Oh, I'm being mindful. I'm going through mediation only. I don't need an attorney," because I thought I was being kind that way. And I remember you stopping me going, "Hold on a sec. That doesn't mean that you do not need all these things." Because I think that that's a misconception that the world has on mindfulness, is that you have to give away everything, and they think that that's being nice. But the biggest thing you taught me was, how are you being nice to you in the process? So could you explain that a little bit further? Because I know you're going to do a much better job than what I just did. But you came at the divine timing for myself, so I could get through this in a better way. So I would love for everybody to hear from you, your great advice on that.
Yeah. So I think a common misunderstanding of mindfulness and of compassion is that they're weak, or that they make us kind of passive. And what I said to you, and I'll say again, is that compassion doesn't mean we do not fight. It means we do not hate. And I think that's the key, is that we never close our heart, but we still take a stand for what's right and what's true, and to fight against social injustice, and that this is essential.
Right. And I love that you said that. And I will tell you this, everyone, this is her fabulous book. I will say this, it sits on my nightstand. Why? Because it's a constant, beautiful reminder to me every day. And yes, you did sign it for me. And you were kind enough to put this in your fashionista box at Benefit the United Way as well. But I love this book. You can also get it in Audible. Gwyneth Paltrow has had it on her list of fabulous books, that to read as well. But I will tell you this, if you have a book club, or if you don't even need a book club, you're a man, you're a woman, you're anybody, this book will open your mind in such a beautiful way. You want the Cliff Notes version, go to her TED Talk. But I have something special to share. Amiguita, ¿qué es lo que hiciste también? Lo tenemos en español. So, and I'm going to say something in Spanish really quickly. Para las que los están escuchando en español, estoy tan orgulloso de mi amiga, Dr. Shauna Shapiro, porque está hablando de cómo podemos cambiar nuestra mentalidad en lo que estamos pasando para ser mejor con nosotras mismas. Y en este libro que ella tiene aquí, que Buenos días, te quiero, es algo muy importante que leer. So, se lo recomiendo completamente, que Buenos días, te quiero es el mejor libro que van a leer este año para poder ser compasivas unas con las otras, porque cuando uno empieza su compasión entre uno misma, lo puede hacer con todas. So what I was saying in Spanish was, what I loved about your book, and why I think you are truly an empowerment specialist beyond a mindfulness expert, is that when you teach people to be nice to themselves, they can be nicer to everybody else that's there. And it truly sets off a ripple effect. And when I was saying in Spanish, I said, this is the book that you're going to want to read this year, so you know how you can be better, so we can better serve each other, as we're all growing in our perspective. So I have a question. If somebody is stressed right now while they're seeing our beautiful empowerment podcast, or right now, what would you recommend for them to do in this moment?
Absolutely. So the first thing I want to say is that what you said is so important, that when we learn to be compassionate with ourselves, we really are transforming the world, that we're never just practicing for ourselves, that everything we do has ripples out into the universe. Right. And so that's where this misunderstanding that when we are kind to ourselves, that somehow it's selfish, or somehow we're not giving enough to others, that when I'm kind to myself, I'm much better resourced to help others. So that's one thing. So to answer your question now, if you're sitting here and you are struggling with something, which is natural, all of us are, the first step is simply to name whatever you're feeling. So fear, loneliness, sadness. When we name our emotion, this was a study done at UCLA, it actually calms down our physiology. It starts to down regulate our nervous system. So whenever you're afraid or angry or upset next time, you simply name it. Fear, I'm scared, I'm lonely. The second step, as I said before, is just put your hand on your heart and just bring yourself kindness. Just say, sweetheart, you're scared. I'm here. I care about your fear, right? Imagine that you were talking to a dear friend. Imagine what you would say to a young child. You'd say, oh, I care about your pain. I'm here with it.
Right.
And the third step, and this has been the most powerful for me, is to realize you're not alone. To reflect on how many other women right now in this world are feeling scared or lonely or sad, and to start sending your kindness and your compassion out to them.
Right.
And that has been incredibly powerful. I was working with a woman with breast cancer, and she was facing her chemotherapy treatment, was very anxious. And we did this practice, right? She named fear, and then she said, sweetheart, I'm here with you. And then she thought of all the other women that were undergoing or facing chemotherapy and sent her love out to them. And that's where she again felt empowered. That's where she felt connected and not alone.
Right. Well, and it's just because I love what you're saying is because we remind ourselves in that process that we're all together. We're in this together, as everyone says. None of us are immune to what's happening. And by being together, you're part of a community that's bettering everyone else. And this also goes back to you get more by giving than receiving. So in that prospect, I think it would be confusing to somebody. What we said earlier about you're compassionate to yourself, then giving compassion to everybody else, but then also you're giving to everybody else. So how would you define that a little bit more for our audience?
So self-compassion is comprised of 3 parts. Self-compassion includes mindfulness, right? Knowing that you're in pain, kindness, the self-soothing, and then what's called common humanity. And common humanity is your recognition that you're part of this human experience, and that it's a shared experience, and that, you know, there's always going to be someone else in the world who's in pain or going through a divorce or struggling financially, and to realize you're not alone, because so often when we're struggling, we think we're the only ones. Kind of like you see, Lolly, when you're like, oh my gosh, she went through divorce too. All of a sudden there's this shared bond. And we need to kind of come out of our isolation when we're in pain and actually begin to connect with others. And that is how we heal.
Right. And also, and I'm curious, what advice would you give somebody? Because I think right now with everything going on in the world, there are some people with a little bit shorter fuses that are happening around us on a daily basis. How do you deal with that from a mindfulness perspective?
Yes. And I have to say the shorter fuses are around us and within us.
Yeah.
It's not just around us.
Thank you for correcting me. That is very true.
You spoke. I have 4 teenagers, and if you heard from them this weekend, I definitely lost my fuse. And what's been interesting for me is, how do we forgive ourselves when we don't act in the ways that we know we want to? And how do we not continue to shame and blame and say, oh, I can't believe I yelled at them, or I can't believe I did that? How do we bring compassion to ourselves without letting ourselves off the hook? We still want to see it clearly. We want to make these changes. And that's where this mindfulness comes in, because it lets you, like a laser, see things clearly, but not spiral into shame. And what's so interesting is when we shame ourselves, it shuts down the learning centers of our brain. So we literally can't learn from our mistakes and change if we're judging ourselves.
Right.
And so the key when we make a mistake, or when someone else does, is to bring compassion. So when someone outside of me has a shorter fuse, instead of meeting their anger with my anger, to really soften, not in a passive way, but in a, I see how angry you are, right? I just name it for them. Feels really hard right now. Yeah, a lot of people are losing their temper right now. There's a lot going on. And so you bring that empathy and compassion to them instead of being like, oh my God, are you kidding? Which is maybe what you want to say. Yeah,
exactly. And it's so funny because you're right. Because everybody wants to say, or say, I can't believe you disrespected me, but that's ego that ends up coming out versus what we want to come out, which is compassion to your point on that. No, definitely. So, Shauna, we've had such a great conversation on this. My curiosity to you is what I also loved when I was reading your book towards the end, when you talk about you had been compassionate with everyone else except your ex-husband there for a while. And you recognize that aspect of it. And I will tell you this, I think, again, it goes back to, and before we even go into that, when you and I met and we became friends, I'll never forget, we were at the Pearl and we had a great glass of wine. We were catching up. Actually, we had tea that day. Sorry, we had wine later, but we had tea that day. I remember telling you, I want to get through this in an amicable way. And you told me, you're like, and you can. You were the first person that told me, and you can. And I loved hearing that I wasn't crazy, despite, I understand that there were other things that happened. And I appreciate our friendship because you brought that back in. But I think a key part of that was also reading some of your last chapters in your book that really brought that to come full circle. So tell us a little bit about that experience in that too, because I think I love the practice you do every morning. You're going to that too, but then when you brought that really brought it full circle for me.
Yeah. So maybe do you want me to share the morning practice and then I can apply it? So as you've mentioned, I went through a pretty hard divorce, and we had a 4-year-old son. So it was quite painful. And I was feeling a lot of shame that I hadn't been able to make my marriage work. And I would wake up every morning with this kind of pit of judgment in my stomach. And my meditation teacher saw what I was doing, and she reminded me to practice kindness. And she said, I want you to say, I love you, Shauna, every day when you wake up. And I was like, no way. It just felt so inauthentic. So she noticed my hesitation, and she said, why not just say, good morning, Shauna, when you wake up? And she said, try putting your hand on your heart when you say it. It will release oxytocin, which is good for you. So the next morning I woke up, took a breath, put my hand on my heart, and said, good morning, Shauna. And it was kind of nice, right? Instead of the judgment and the shame and the fear, I just greeted myself with kindness. And as I continued to practice, it started growing that pathway of kindness toward myself. And a couple months later, it was my birthday. And I was actually in Big Sur at the most beautiful retreat in the whole world called Esalen. And I woke up that morning. It was my birthday. It's the first time I'd ever been alone on my birthday. My son was with his father at a long planned family reunion. So I was alone. And I went down to these mineral hot springs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It was right before sunrise. And I climbed in and I put my hand on my heart to say good morning. And all of a sudden, this image of my grandmother came to me. And there was mists around, and I felt her love. And I said, good morning. I love you, Shauna. Happy birthday. And it was as if the dam around my heart burst. And this love came pouring in, my grandmother's love, my mother's love, my own self-love. And, I wish I could tell you every day since then has been this bubble of self-love, and I've never felt judgment or shame again. And that's not true. But what is true is this pathway, this literal neural pathway in my brain was established of self-kindness. And so I started practicing every day, good morning, I love you. And some days it felt weird, and some days it felt lonely, but some days there was profound love. And as I continued to practice, I started sending it to my son, and then my mom and dad, and I would start sending out texts in the morning, good morning, I love you, just to whoever came to my mind. And I began sending every morning kind of like a meditation or prayer to the people in my life who were needing more support, to the people I loved. And then after a few months, I realized I never was sending it to my ex-husband. And I realized that this practice is really beyond right and wrong and beyond anger, that there's a way that you can still forgive and love someone, even if you don't agree with them. Even what they're doing from your perspective is wrong. And so I started even including him in my meditation, good morning, I love you, where I'm just greeting him with kindness. Because again, this kindness, it doesn't mean we don't stand up for ourselves. It doesn't mean we don't fight against injustice, but it means we do not hate. We never close our heart.
Right. And I will tell you this, it's so beautiful to hear you say that perspective, and that also, quite frankly, that you're not perfect at it either. Because I have taught myself as your friend she will all of a sudden text me and say, I'm just thinking about you. Good morning. I love you. And I'm going, oh my gosh, I've not said that to myself in, I can't tell you how long. And I'm like, oh yes, I haven't done my practice I'm supposed to be doing in the morning. And so that's kind of where I've been. And I'm so grateful to you to acknowledge that, because I was going to be embarrassed to tell you here, and I'm telling you to everybody else, because one thing she also taught me was vulnerability, is that that's okay. It's okay to go ahead and to jump off the horse one day and get back on it the next day. And that I just think that that is something that is really key and important. And as your friend, I appreciate your vulnerability and letting us know that none of us have to be perfect, that that's okay too.
And I think that's one of the most important things, is that perfection isn't possible.
Right.
But transformation is, right? And transformation begins with these little changes, like 5% more kindness to yourself, 5% more patience, 5% more, relaxation and ease, and that it doesn't have to be perfect. And I know, Citlali, you said, at the end, you wanted me to share kind of the most important takeaway. And I know we're drawing to a close here, and I wanted to share this, that change is always possible. No matter what mistakes you've made, no matter what's happening in your life right now, change is possible for all of us. This is the fundamental truth of neuroplasticity, is that our brains are constantly changing, and that we can literally re-architect the very structure of our brain to be happier, to be more compassionate, to be more present, based on practice. And that was really the intention of my book, Good Morning, I Love You, Buenos Dias, Te Quiero, is to bring the science and the practice so that people actually have the tools to make these changes in their life.
Right. And I have to tell you, thank you. And thank you for sharing that, because knowing that change is possible, transformation is possible, gives us all hope that we can all do it for each other every day. And Buenos Dias, Te Quiero, Corazón. And it's funny, because I'll never forget the first time you said it to me. I was like, oh, because I was in a different situation that had not been, as you said, open so much. I was like, oh, what does this mean? And again, that's where your brain really, until you practice it, be like, no, you should be telling people you love them. This is a natural response. But I think that we've built these little walls around our hearts at times that haven't allowed us to truly feel or receive it, to be able to give it, but to receive it from ourselves, I should say, to be able to give it a little bit more. So I will tell you this to all of our audience. I hope that you have truly enjoyed today's conversation. Dr. Shauna Shapiro is not only a treasure as a friend, but she's a treasure just because of what she does from a global perspective. And I am so excited. We're going to put a link here so that you'll be able to go directly to purchase one of her books, as well as to go ahead to link you to that way you can follow her on Instagram. You want to do a little daily dosage of a great something, or you look at my stories. I'm normally reposting hers because her quotes are exactly what I'm thinking half of the time, which is wonderful. Everybody knows how much I love quotes. But I love that we're both two women that want to empower each other, but we want to empower the world at the same time. And I love you so much, my beautiful friend. You are just a treasure, a wonderful person. And I'm just so excited that today I got to share a little bit of you to our audience, because I know that today you made a ripple effect. And there's going to be many people that I know you taught us all how to be compassionate to ourselves today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
So everyone, to quickly summarize, I'm going to say this. We're going to follow Dr. Shauna Shapiro tomorrow morning. If you can, just start with good morning and look at yourself in the mirror. If you can later on, say good morning, I love you. And the third thing, eventually you're going to get to good morning, I love you, Shauna. Good morning, I love you, Citlali. And then good morning, I love you, whoever has hurt you in the past. Because then you're going to truly free yourself and transform the way Shauna has transformed everyone else that she touches through her books. So without further ado, everybody, make it a fabulous, happy, empowerment day. And we'll chat with you later. Bye.